The physicians said his memories would fade one by one, like candles blown out in a dark room. First the smaller ones, then the big ones, then everything. By December 2021, Thomas Wilder, a retired Alaska State Trooper, had forgotten his badge number. He had forgotten about his wife's burial. He'd forgotten the sound of his daughter laughing. Alzheimer's has taken nearly everything from him. Almost. Because he had an unforgettable memory, so deeply buried that no disease could penetrate it, an event that refused to die. The memory of a shivering, half-frozen white wolf cub rescued from an icy river on a night like this one. Thomas couldn't remember how he'd entered the Denali wilderness that night. He couldn't even remember how the storm had come upon him. But something in him, something older than memory, language and thought, had drawn him to that path. At the end of the trail, something awaited him, something that had been waiting 6 years. This is the story of the one memory that Alzheimer's could not erase. If stories like this resonate with you, consider subscribing. This channel exists to tell stories that should be remembered. Thomas Wilder spent 28 years walking into situations most people would avoid. Bar fights on the outskirts of Fairbanks, domestic calls at 2 a.m. where the stillness on the other side of the door was worse than yelling. Search and rescue efforts carried out in such harsh conditions that helicopters couldn't fly and snowmobiles couldn't move, leaving only the option of strapping on snowshoes and walking straight into the snow. 28 years of this. 28 years of wearing a badge across America's most brutal terrain. He retired in the spring of 2019, not because he wanted to, but because his hands had begun to do things his brain hadn't instructed them to. He'd reach for a coffee mug, but instead grabbed the table's edge. He'd write out paperwork and discover the pen had stopped mid-sentence, frozen, as if his fingers had forgotten what letters looked like. He told himself it was age. 60 years of Alaska winters might wear out even the toughest man. His daughter, Sarah, knew better. She'd seen it before anybody else. Her father would pause in the middle of a discussion, his gaze drawn to an invisible place beyond the wall, as if looking for a word that had been there a second ago, but was now gone. He occasionally called her Margaret, using her mother's name, but quickly corrected himself with a smile. "Dad, please. Come live with me in Anchorage," she urged, sitting across from him at his cabin's kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug she wasn't sipping from. Thomas shook his head. "I'm fine, sweetheart. You left the stove on 3 times last week. People forget things. You forgot my name, Dad." Silence. It hung between them like something solid, with weight. Thomas stared at the table's wood grain, tracing the lines with his thumb. And he didn't say anything for a long time. "This cabin is all I've got left of your mother," he finally said quietly. "If I leave here, I won't just lose my house. I'll lose her." Sarah didn't argue after that. She couldn't. Margaret Wilder died in the fall of 2017 from pancreatic cancer, which struck quickly and mercilessly. 7 weeks from diagnosis to funeral. Thomas held her hand for every one of those 49 days. And when it was over, when the house was empty, the bed was cold, and the only sound left was the wind pounding against the windows, he sat down in his chair by the fireplace and didn't move for 3 days. The silence nearly killed him. Not the pain. He knew grief. He'd recovered bodies from freezing rivers and delivered news to families' front doors. He understood what loss looked like from the outside. But from the inside, it wasn't a loss. It was an absence. There was a hole where a voice once was. A shape was missing opposite the bed. The cabin still smelled like her lavender soap weeks after she was gone. And then, one morning, it didn't, which was the worst day of all. He overcame it the same way he'd overcome everything else, by crossing one leg over the other, sticking to his routines, and walking. Every morning at 6 o'clock, Thomas Wilder walked, regardless of the weather. It started as a patrol route, a 12-mile loop that passed through the spruce forests east of his home, along the frozen ridge of Crow Creek, past the old fire lookout tower and down the valley. For 28 years, he'd walked that road in uniform, searching for wayward hikers, checking on remote cabins, and keeping the wild under control. Even after retirement, he kept walking. The same route, same time. "It's the only thing that still makes sense," he told Dr. James Harlow during a monthly exam at the Healy Clinic. Dr. Harlow, a patient man with gentle eyes and a beard that had turned white 10 years ahead of schedule, leaned forward in his chair. "Thomas, do you understand what's going on? The diagnosis won't reverse itself. There will come a morning when you walk that trail and can't remember how to return." Thomas's eyes stayed fixed, the way they had after nearly 30 years of facing danger. "Then this will be a hellish final patrol," he said. Dr. Harlow didn't laugh. Nobody laughed anymore when Thomas cracked jokes. By the winter of 2021, the sickness had advanced. The forgetting came in waves now, not in the steady, gentle erosion Dr. Harlow had described, but in startling collapses, like floorboards giving way beneath his feet without warning. One morning in October, he stood in his kitchen with a can of beans and couldn't remember how the can opener worked. He stayed there for 11 minutes, turning the device over in his hands, before the information flooded back like a dam breaking. In November, he drove to Healy for groceries and sat in the parking lot for 40 minutes because he couldn't remember which building housed the store. He knew he was in the right town. He knew there was a business in front of him. But the names on the placards had transformed into shapes, meaningless groupings of lines and curves. His neighbor, Frank Dawson, a former bush pilot who lived 7 miles east and checked on Thomas twice a week, began placing notes on the kitchen countertop. "Your name is Thomas Wilder. You're 62 years old. You live alone. Your daughter's name is Sarah. If you need assistance, dial this number." Thomas found the note one morning and read it 5 times before realizing it was about him. It was the worst night. The Alaska darkness arrived early in December, with the sun setting at 3 p.m. and the world outside the cabin windows turning black. Thomas would sit by the fireplace and listen to the wind, which could sound like Margaret's voice or like nothing at all, and he couldn't tell which was worse. But there was one thing the sickness could not touch, something tenacious and unfathomable. Every night, Thomas dreamed of the wolf. The same dream, always the same. A frozen river, a weak, frantic moan that could scarcely be heard above the wind, his hands reaching into black water. Then the weight of it, the little trembling weight of a wolf pup pressed against his chest, its heartbeat so faint it was almost unreal. He would wake from the dream with his hands outstretched, fingers wrapped around something that wasn't there, and for a few seconds, just a few, everything was crystal clear. He knew who he was. He knew exactly where he was. He remembered what he'd carried in his arms on that cold night 6 years before. And then the fog would come back, and the clarity would fade, and Thomas would sit on the edge of his bed, breathing hard, trying to hold on to the feeling like water in your fists. It always slipped away. But it kept coming back. Every night it came back. But no one expected the dream to end on the night of December 17th, 2021, and the wolf would no longer be a recollection. Because that night, Thomas Wilder was going to walk his final patrol, and he wasn't going to walk alone. The night of December 17th started like any other night. Thomas sat in his chair beside the fireplace, watching the flames curl and snap on the blackened stone. He never forgot how to build a fire. His hands might fail him in 100 different ways, buttoning a shirt, lacing his boots, gripping a pen. But when it came to fire, the muscle memory was so deep that no sickness could extract it. Crumple the paper, stack the kindling into a teepee, 1 match, wait, feed it slowly. Margaret had always thought he built flames the way other men wrote love letters, deliberately, patiently, and with more devotion than the task demanded. He couldn't remember her saying it, but his hands recalled. And occasionally, in the calm of the evening, that was enough. Outside, the wind had been blowing since lunchtime. It came from the north, a low, consistent pressure that pressed on the cabin walls and sent thin streams of snow hissing across the glass like sand. The radio had warned of a severe storm system descending from the Brooks Range. Temperatures are forecast to plunge below -40. Visibility is near nil. Travel isn't recommended. Thomas had turned off the radio at 6 o'clock. He didn't like the voices anymore. They spoke too quickly and with too many words, and by the time he finished one statement, 3 more had already passed. Silence was easy. He ate dinner standing at the kitchen counter, a can of soup heated on the stove and eaten directly from the pot, because he couldn't remember where Margaret had put the bowls. He knew they were in the kitchen. He knew they were white with a blue ring, but the cabinet doors looked the same now, and opening them felt like a test he didn't want to fail. By 9 o'clock, the fire had died down, and Thomas had fallen asleep in his chair. The dream arrived as it usually did. The frozen river, the sound, the reach, the weight. But tonight's dream was different. Tonight, the wolf pup in his arms finally opened its eyes. 2 unbelievably light amber rings illuminated the darkness like twin candles. For the first time in months of dreaming, the pup stared straight at him. Not through him, not beyond him, at him. And then it howled. The sound was immense, much too large for something so small, and it ripped through the dream like a crack in ice, waking Thomas, gasping, his hands grasping the armrests of his chair, his heart hammering against his ribs. He sat still for a long time, breathing. The cabin was dark. The fire had turned to embers. The wind screamed outside. And then Thomas Wilder did something he couldn't explain. Not then or ever. He stood up. He put on his boots. He put on his heaviest coat, an old patrol, parka with the state trooper patch still stitched on the left shoulder. He took his flashlight from the hook near the door, and he went out into the storm. He wasn't sure why. If you grabbed him by the shoulders and asked what he was doing, where he was going, and why he was heading into a snowstorm at 10 o'clock at night in -38 degrees Celsius, he wouldn't be able to answer. Because the part of his brain responsible for decision-making, evaluating consequences, and understanding cause and effect relationships had been dormant for months. What moved him was something different, something underneath thought, something irrational, instinct. The same instinct that had guided him for 28 years of patrolling. The same instinct that had shown him which doors were safe to knock on and which were not. The same instinct that had gotten him out of bed at 3 a.m. 6 years before. A night that would become the most significant night of his life even, though he couldn't remember it. The track was buried in new snow, but his boots found it regardless. Walking the same 12-mile route for 40 years had etched the path into his body, much like a river carving a canyon, through repetition rather than strength. Move away from the dried-up fir tree, walk straight past the rock that looks like a bear, down the slope to the creek bed. He walked without thinking, without deciding, without a choice. The storm tightened around him like a fist. 6 years earlier, the night of March 9th, 2015, Thomas Wilder had been on patrol, a real one, in uniform, with his badge pinned to his chest and his radio crackling on his belt. The temperature had dropped to -41 degrees Fahrenheit, which was unprecedented for interior Alaska in March, the kind of cold that crystallized your breath before it ever left your mouth, a deadly kind of cold. While driving on the road between Healy and Cantwell, he received a report that an animal was in distress near Crow Creek. The caller said they heard noises coming from the river. Could be a moose calf, could be nothing. Could you check it out? Copy, I'm leaving in 15 minutes. He almost did not go. The road conditions were awful. The roadway was a sheet of black ice covered in 2 inches of powder, and his truck had already fishtailed twice in the previous hour. A wise man would have turned it in as inaccessible and gone home. But Thomas Wilder had never been wise about these matters. He'd been thorough, and there was a difference. He stopped the truck at the Crow Creek trailhead and traveled the remaining half-mile on foot, his flashlight carving a tiny tunnel through the darkness. The forest was silent, the deep, heavy calm of extreme cold, when even the wind appeared to freeze in place, and the only sound was the crunch of your own feet on the snow. He heard it before he saw anything. A sound, high-pitched, just barely there, a thin, frantic wail that may have come from the wind, a branch shattering under the weight of ice, or nothing at all. But it was not nothing. Thomas paused. He held his breath. He listened. There it was again, coming from the river. He proceeded slowly down the bank, testing each step, for Crow Creek did not freeze solid like the lakes did. The ice on the margins was thick enough to walk on, but in the center, where the current was rapid and dark, the surface was a trap, a thin layer of white over black water that could swallow a man whole. He swept his beam across the ice and noticed it. A hole, approximately 2 feet across. The edges were rough and raw. Something had slipped through. Thomas slid to his belly and crawled. He could feel the ice groaning beneath his weight, that low, deep vibration that every Alaskan recognizes and fears, the sound of something solid debating whether or not to remain solid. He approached the hole's edge and aimed his flashlight into the black water. Then everything changed. 2 eyes returned his gaze. Amber, bright, terrified, a tiny wolf pup, no more than 6 or 7 weeks old, was clinging to the edge of the ice with its front paws, its body buried in the icy river, its small head just above the waterline. The fur was white, all white, even when wet and plastered against its skull, and trembling so furiously that its entire body was a blur of motion. The whiteness was unmistakable. An Arctic wolf pup, alone, in the center of a frozen river, in -41 degrees of cold. Something in its gaze stopped Thomas dead. Not dread. He had seen terror in 1,000 eyes, both human and animal. It was something else. There was something beneath the fear. Recognition. Not the kind that comes from a previous meeting, the kind that results from one living thing looking at another and realizing in an instant that this is the time, this is the only chance. This is the hand that either reaches in or doesn't. Thomas did not hesitate. He submerged his arms in the black water up to his elbows. The cold struck him like an electric charge, eliciting a white-hot scream that raced up his arms and erupted inside his chest. His muscles seized, his breath caught in his throat. Every nerve in his body shouted at him to pull back, get out of the water, and save himself. He did not back down. His hands found the pup's body beneath the surface, impossibly small and delicate, a bundle of bones and wet fur, with a heartbeat so faint it scarcely registered against his fingers. He pulled. The pup broke free with the sound of tape tearing, the ice loosening its grasp, and Thomas fell onto his back, hugging the animal to his chest, panting and shaking, his arms numb from the elbows down. He could not move. He couldn't breathe. The pup nuzzled against him. Its body shook so violently that Thomas felt the vibration in his own ribs. "Easy," Thomas said. Its amber eyes were large and round, riveted on his face, with an intensity that did not belong to something so young, so small, and so near death. His voice was hardly audible to himself. "Easy, tiny one. I've got you." He unzipped his patrol parka and pressed the pup to his bare chest before zipping the coat back up around both of them. He could feel the small heartbeat flutter against his own, fast, desperate, yet present, still there. "You're safe now," he said, clutching the pup tighter. He remained on the ice for a long time, holding the pup to his chest and feeling the small body gradually stop trembling as his warmth soaked into it. The cold was eating through his suit from every angle, through his back where he lay on the ice, through his legs, through his face, but he stayed still. He could not move. Because the pup's trembling had subsided, its breathing had slowed, and it had tucked its snout into the hollow of Thomas's throat and closed its eyes. And something changed inside Thomas Wilder. He couldn't name it. It was not anything he could explain, something old and wordless, the same power that causes a mother to reach for her infant before hearing it cry. An instinct, a bond, a relationship that existed before language, cognition, and memory. He didn't realize it at the time, but sitting on the ice of Crow Creek with a wolf pup sleeping against his heart would become the one thing his mind would not let go of, the one candle that would remain lit long after the others had gone out, the single recollection that could save his life. But the most surprising thing hadn't happened yet. Back to the trail. December 17th, 2021. Thomas had walked for more than an hour. The storm had devoured the entire globe. There was no sky, earth, or trees, only white. A thundering, swirling, blinding wall of white slammed against his face and filled his lungs with cold air. He had stopped. He was standing in the middle of the route, or what he believed was the trail, holding a dead flashlight, with no idea where he had come from. The chill was inside him now, not on his skin, but inside, in his bones, in his bloodstream. He could feel it slowing everything down, his heartbeat, his thoughts, and the already damaged machinery of his brain grinding toward a halt. He looked around. Nothing. White in all directions. He couldn't recall where he was. He could not remember where he lived. He could not recall his own name. Thomas Wilder, a former trooper, widower, and father who had protected this area for 28 years, knelt down in the snow and refused to get up. The wind howled. The snow fell. And somewhere in the darkness, something howled back. So close, it seemed impossible. The cry came from anywhere and nowhere. It cut through the blizzard like a blade through cloth. Low at first, almost undetectable, a vibration more felt than heard, rising through the snow-packed ground and into Thomas's knees, which were pressed against the frozen earth. Then it climbed. It climbed past the wind, the hiss of the snow, and the blood pumping in his ears, becoming something enormous and old that couldn't be ignored. Thomas raised his head. His eyes were almost locked shut. Ice had formed on his lashes, and each blink was a small act of violence, cracking, shredding, and blurring. The flashlight had died. The world was nothing but white noise and white darkness. A devastating cold enveloped him from all sides. The howl ceased. Silence. Not the quiet of absence, the quiet of presence. There was something out there, somewhere close. He could feel it, the way you feel someone watching you in a dark room, not with your eyes or ears, but with a different kind of sense. Something was hardwired into the oldest region of the human brain, the part that remembers what it was like to be prey. Thomas's heart was barely beating. His body temperature had dropped below 92 degrees. His fingertips were white. His thoughts moved slowly, thickly, and inexplicably, like water through frozen pipes. But his instincts were still alive, and his instincts urged him not to move. He heard it before he saw it, the soft compression of snow under weight, a rhythm, steady, deliberate, unhurried. 4 beats, pause, 4 beats, pause. Something walked toward him through the storm with the patience of a monster with unlimited time. Then the white shifted. It was like watching a piece of the blizzard break away from itself, a shape emerging from the chaos, acquiring form, gaining edges. White on white on white, almost invisible, almost unreal, except for 2 spots of light that burned through the darkness like embers in ash. Amber eyes. The wolf emerged from the storm 10 feet in front of Thomas and came to a halt. It was huge. A fully mature male Arctic wolf, easily 130 pounds, standing about 3 feet at the shoulder, with a coat so pristine, so impossibly white, it seemed to sparkle in the snow. Its fur was thick and luxuriant, ruffled by the wind and crusted with ice along the muzzle and crest. Its ears were forward. Its tail was low, not tucked, not threatening, just waiting. And those eyes, those amber eyes, fixed on Thomas with an intensity that went beyond curiosity, caution, and the usual predator-prey assessment. Something in those eyes was searching. Thomas stared back. His mind was fractured, bits of thought drifting like wreckage after an explosion. He wasn't sure where he was. He wasn't sure who he was. He had no idea what this creature was, why it stood in front of him, or what it wanted. But somewhere amid the ruins, beneath the disease, the confusion, and the years of gradual erasure, a solitary fragment pulsed. 1. Recognize those eyes. He wasn't sure how he knew. He wasn't sure what the knowledge meant. It was more feeling than memory, a faint but undeniable warmth in the center of his chest, like the last ember in a fire everyone assumed had died out. The wolf stepped forward. Thomas did not move. Another step. The wolf's enormous paws sank into the snow without a sound. Its breath came in slow, visible puffs, steady, controlled, purposeful. Everything about it radiated a calm that seemed impossible for a wild animal standing 10 feet from a human in the middle of a blizzard. It was 5 feet away now. Thomas could see the details: the dark skin on its nose, the frost on its whiskers, the thick fur around its neck like a mane. He could hear it breathe, slow, even, patient. 4 feet, 3. The wolf stopped directly in front of him. They were face to face, Thomas on his knees, the wolf upright, eyes level. The wind roared around them, but between them was a pocket of something else. Quiet. Thomas held his breath. He could not move, couldn't breathe. The wolf leaned forward, slowly, so gently the movement was almost imperceptible, a gradual closing of the gap between two worlds never meant to meet. Its snout came first, dark and wet, extending toward Thomas's face. It stopped an inch from his cheek. Thomas felt the wolf's breath on his skin, warm, impossibly warm against his freezing face. It came in slow, controlled exhalations, each one carrying a heat that seemed to push back the cold the way sunlight pushes back shadow. The wolf inhaled, deep, long, drawing in Thomas's scent the way a scholar reads a book, thoroughly, completely, without missing anything. Then the wolf made a sound Thomas had never heard before. Not a growl, not a whimper, not a howl. Something in between, a low, trembling vocalization that began deep in the animal's chest and spread through its whole body. A sound with weight, a sound with meaning, a sound that, if translated into human language, might have meant, "I found you." The wolf rubbed its forehead against Thomas's chest. The contact sent a shockwave through him, not physical but something electric, something that bypassed his damaged brain and went straight to the place where memory existed before language, thought, and Alzheimer's. Heartbeat. Small, fast, against my chest. The fragment came to the surface and dissolved. Another followed. Cold water. Black. My hands. Reaching. And another. White fur. Wet. Shaking. Alive. They came like lightning, brief, blinding, and vanished before he could grasp them. But each one left an imprint. Each one burned a little brighter than the last. And somewhere in Thomas Wilder's head, something was rebuilding itself. Not a memory, not yet, but the ghost of one, the shape of something that used to be there, pressing against the walls of darkness, trying to re-enter. The wolf had not moved. Its forehead remained pressed against Thomas's chest, directly over his heart, and its eyes were closed. The trembling sound continued, that deep, resonant vibration, and Thomas realized with sudden clarity that the wolf was listening to his heartbeat. What would you do if a wild animal laid its head against your chest and listened to your heart in the middle of a snowstorm? Would you run? Would you freeze? Or would you do what Thomas did? Thomas raised his hands. They were stiff, awkward, barely functioning. The cold had turned his fingers into wooden pegs. But he lifted them anyway, slowly, gently, as if reaching for something precious that could disappear if you moved too quickly. He put his hands on the wolf's neck. The fur was unbelievably thick, inches deep, dense, insulating, warm. Thomas hadn't felt this warm in hours. His freezing fingers sank into it like they were digging into hot sand, and the relief was so immediate and overwhelming that he let out a raw, broken sigh. Something he'd been holding in for far too long. The wolf shifted its weight. Without moving away from Thomas's chest, it lowered itself to the ground, curling its legs beneath it like a dog lying near a fireplace. Then it leaned into him. Its entire weight, 130 pounds of muscle, bone, and fur, pressed hard against Thomas's side, and the heat was intense. It radiated from the animal's body like a furnace, punching through Thomas's frozen coat, shirt, and skin, reaching the cold that had sunk into his veins and bones and forcing it back. Thomas leaned into the wolf. He had no choice. His body was shutting down, core temperature dropping, blood draining from his extremities, consciousness narrowing into a tunnel. The wolf's warmth was all that stood between him and the darkness, and his body knew it, even if his mind couldn't comprehend it. They sat together in the snow, man and wolf, shoulder to shoulder. The storm raged above and around them, but warmth radiated between their two bodies. There was contact. There was something neither the cold nor the sickness could remove. Thomas's eyes were closing. The memory fragments were still appearing, flickering, fading, then returning, but they were coming faster now, more vivid, growing more insistent. A river, ice, a hole in the surface. My arms are in the water, the cold, the shock, and then there's the weight, small, trembling, alive, a heartbeat against my chest. The wolf moved closer. Its breath stayed steady against Thomas's ribcage. Its eyes remained closed. And Thomas, his intellect damaged, his body weakening, his identity erased by an illness that had robbed him of nearly everything, felt something he hadn't felt in months. He felt safe, not warm, not comfortable, not rescued. Safe. The feeling you get when you're exactly where you should be, even if you can't explain why. The sensation you get when the missing piece you didn't realize you were searching for crushes itself against your side, breathes in time with your breathing, and asks for nothing but offers everything. For the first time in years, Thomas Wilder stopped fighting. He stopped trying to remember. He stopped trying to make sense of the fractured bits. He stopped grasping at the walls of darkness inside his own mind. He closed his eyes. He rested his weight against the wolf. He let the animal's heartbeat replace his own, steady, slow, ancient and certain, and he fell asleep. This wasn't the sleep of a man dying in the snow, not the perilous, hypothermic descent into oblivion that kills 1,000 people each year in Alaska's wilderness. A different kind of sleep. The kind that comes when the body, after months of tension, dread, and uncertainty, knows it is being protected, that something is standing guard. For the first time in a long time, it is okay to let go. Thomas slept. The wolf didn't. Its amber eyes opened as Thomas's closed. It searched the darkness left and right, up the slope and down the valley, with the calculating alertness of an apex predator on watch. Its ears pivoted independently, tracking sounds too faint for humans to hear. Its nostrils flared, tasting the wind for danger. The storm continued. The temperature dropped to -41. The snow fell an inch every hour, laying a white blanket over both of them. The wolf did not move. It pressed harder against the man's body. It wrapped its enormous tail around his legs. It settled its chin on his thigh and fixed its gaze on the darkness. And the true story had only just begun. The helicopter approached from the southeast, a low mechanical thunder that escalated from a whisper to a roar in 3 minutes. Thomas heard it before he understood it. The sound registered somewhere in his shattered mind as something familiar, a vibration he had lived with for 28 years of patrols, rescue, missions, and evacuations. But the link between the sound and its meaning had been destroyed, and all he could do was sit in the snow, his palm on the wolf's neck, and listen as the sky grew louder. The wolf understood before Thomas did. Its ears snapped back, its body tightened, every muscle drawing taut beneath thick white fur, shifting in an instant from warm, resting protector to something coiled, alert, ready. Its amber eyes locked on the sky, tracking the sound with a precision no human sense could match. The helicopter, a red and white Alaska State Search and Rescue Bell 412, roared over the ridgeline at 200 feet, its blades turning the morning air into a cyclone of noise and snow. The downdraft hit first, ripping fresh powder off the ground and flinging it upward in a white tornado that swallowed everything. The wolf rose. It came to its feet in one continuous motion, swift, powerful, explosive. Its hackles lifted along the ridge of its spine. Its lips drew back, not in hostility but in alarm. The noise was deafening, the wind was brutal, and every survival instinct in the wolf's body fired at once, screaming a single demand: run. Thomas felt the wolf's weight leave his side, and the cold surged in like water into a cracked ship. The warmth was gone. The contact was gone. The creature that had kept him alive through the longest night of his life stood 4 feet away, body angled toward the tree line, muscles loaded, ready to melt into the wilderness the way it had come, like smoke, shadow, or something that had never existed at all. No, Thomas's voice was shattered, a rasping, scarcely human sound that had no right to be heard above the helicopter's roar. But it carried. The wolf paused, one paw lifted. Its body leaned toward the trees. Every fiber of it was aimed at escape. But its head, its enormous, magnificent, ice-crusted head, turned back toward Thomas. Those amber eyes. "Don't go," Thomas whispered. The words took everything he had left. His vision was failing. His body was shutting down. The wolf's brief warmth had faded, and the cold was slowly reclaiming him. "Please, do not go." The wolf stared at Thomas. Then it looked to the helicopter descending through the swirling snow, then back to Thomas. Nobody could have predicted what that choice would mean. Captain Maria Chen, the leader of the search and rescue team, was scanning the ground through the blowing snow when she saw something that made her grab the door handle so hard her knuckles went white. "There!" she shouted into her headset. 2 o'clock, at the edge of the clearing. I have a person down." The pilot banked. The ground rushed up, and then Captain Chen saw the wolf. "What the?" The words died in her throat. A man knelt in the snow. He was alive. She could see his breath. And standing beside him, close enough to touch, was the biggest white wolf she had ever seen. It wasn't attacking. It wasn't circling either. "Is that a wolf?" the pilot asked, his voice rising. "Take us down," Chen ordered. "Stay 50 meters out. Don't approach until I've done an assessment." The helicopter landed in a shower of snow. Chen jumped first, followed by paramedic David Reese. They crouched beneath the still spinning rotors, gripping medical kits and squinting against the rotor wash. They stopped 30 feet from Thomas. The wolf was still there. It hadn't run. It hadn't retreated. It stood exactly where it had been, between Thomas and the world, and its amber eyes were fixed on the 2 approaching figures with what Chen would later describe in her official report as calm assessment. Not aggressive, not afraid. "That's a wild wolf," Reese muttered, reaching for the flare gun on his belt. "Captain, that is a wild Arctic wolf. We need to—" "Don't," Chen said. Quiet, sharp, final. "Look at it." Reese peered. The wolf was standing so close to the kneeling man that their bodies nearly touched. Its tail was low but not tucked. Its ears were forward, and its stance was purposeful, unmistakable, and not the posture of a predator near prey. "That wolf has been keeping him alive," Chen said. Even as she said it, she realized how absurd it sounded. She knew that sentence had never appeared in an Alaska search and rescue incident report before. She said it anyway, because it was true, and the proof was right in front of her. Amber eyes, white fur, and a loyalty that contradicted every rule anyone knew about wild animal behavior. Chen stepped forward, slowly. One hand outstretched, palm open, the universal sign of no threat. She spoke in a deep, steady voice, not to the man, to the wolf. "Easy. We're here to help him. Easy." The wolf watched her approach. 10 feet. 8. 5. Its nostrils flared as it sampled her scent, catalogued her, and decided. Time stretched. Then the wolf stepped aside. Not away, aside. It moved 3 feet to Thomas's left and sat in the slow, its gaze never leaving Chen's hands as she knelt beside him and pressed her fingers to his throat. "Pulse is 42, hypothermic, responsive but confused." She pulled a thermal blanket from her kit and draped it over Thomas's shoulders. His eyes were open but unfocused, looking past Chen, past the chopper, past the clearing, staring at the wolf. "Sir? Sir, can you hear me?" "What is your name?" Thomas didn't answer. His lips moved, but no sound came out. His right hand, stiff and bruised, reached toward the wolf. "Sir, we need to get you to the helicopter. Can you stand?" Thomas didn't look at her. He looked at the wolf, the only wolf. "He came back," Thomas murmured. His voice was scarcely audible in the frigid air. "He came back for me." Chen looked at Reese. Reese looked at Chen. Neither of them spoke. They carried Thomas between them, one arm over each shoulder, and began walking slowly toward the chopper. Thomas's legs were barely working. His weight shifted between them with each step. But his head was turned back, his gaze fixed on the wolf sitting in the snow behind them. The wolf had not moved. It sat in the clearing, white on white, almost invisible against the snow, and watched them carry the man to the machine. Its amber eyes tracked each step. Its body remained perfectly still. And as the distance between them widened, 20 feet, 30, 40, a sound began to rise in the wolf's chest. Low, deep, rising. By the time Chen and Reese had loaded Thomas onto the helicopter, wrapped thermal blankets around him, started the IV, and pulled the doors closed, the sound had become a howl. It sliced the morning air like a razor, long, continuous, trembling, with a resonance that echoed in the chests of everyone in that clearing. It was not the howl of a hunting wolf calling its pack. It wasn't the howl of a territorial animal staking its ground. It was the howl of something saying goodbye. Thomas heard it through the helicopter walls, through the engine noise, through a veil of cold, Alzheimer's and exhaustion. When he heard it, he pressed his hand hard against the window and spoke a single word no one inside the chopper could hear. "Stay." The helicopter lifted off. The ground fell away. The clearing shrank, turning the trees into lines, the snow into a blank white page, and the wolf into a single point of white against the white. And then it was gone. Thomas rested his forehead against the cool window glass and closed his eyes. Tears came again, hot, silent, unstoppable, and no one wiped them away because no one understood what they meant. Chen assumed he was crying from pain. Reese thought he was crying from confusion. The pilot gave it no thought. None of them realized Thomas Wilder was crying because, for the first time in 2 years, he remembered something. Exactly, completely, without fog, fragmentation, or the slow dissolve that had taken everything else. He remembered a frozen river. He remembered the weight of a pup in his arms. He remembered whispering, "You're safe now." And he remembered the pup watching him the entire time, amber eyes wide open, understanding, and making a promise no animal should ever make. The truth hadn't evaporated. It had waited, waiting for 6 years, waiting through winters and summers, and the gradual decline of the one man who had given it a reason to wait. And now, from a helicopter high above the Denali wilderness, Thomas Wilder watched that truth shrink against the snow until it vanished, and something inside him burst open that would never close again. The hospital room was very white. That was the first thing Thomas noticed when he opened his eyes. The harsh, unnatural whiteness of the ceiling tiles, walls, sheets, and fluorescent light above his bed. It was a different kind of white from the one he had been surrounded by for the last 12 hours. The snow had been alive, shifting, breathing, moving. This white was dead, sterile, buzzing. He blinked. His body felt distant, there but not quite his, as if someone had disconnected and loosely reconnected the links between his head and his limbs. An IV line ran from the back of his left hand to a bag of clear fluid hanging beside the bed. A monitor beeped at regular intervals. A blood pressure cuff pinched his upper arm, then released with a mechanical sigh. He was at Fairbanks Memorial Hospital. He didn't know that. He didn't recognize the name of the building, the city, or the state. He didn't know the year. He didn't know why he was here. But he knew one thing. He knew the wolf was gone. He could feel its absence the way an amputee feels a missing limb, a phantom sensation, a weight that should have been against his side but wasn't. The warmth was gone. The heartbeat was gone. The steady, ancient pattern of another creature's breathing, synced with his own, was gone. In its place was the beep of a monitor, the hum of fluorescent lights, and a loneliness so vast that the Alaska wilderness had felt crowded. Thomas turned his head toward the window. The blinds were half open. Outside, snow fell softly, slowly, indifferently. He watched it for a long time, searching the white for a shape that wasn't there. The door opened. Sarah Wilder had driven 4 hours on slick roads from Anchorage to Fairbanks. She had not stopped. She hadn't eaten. She'd gripped the steering wheel so hard, her fingers had clenched into claws by the time she pulled into the hospital parking lot. And she had sprinted, really ran, through the halls in her winter boots, her coat still on, her hair damp with snow. She paused in the doorway of room 214 and clapped a hand to her mouth. He was alive. Her father was alive. He was thin and pale, with deep hollows beneath his eyes that hadn't been there 3 weeks earlier, and the skin on his fingers was peeling from frostbite. He looked 10 years older than 62, but he was alive. "Dad!" Thomas looked away from the window. He looked at her, and Sarah saw it, the flicker, the searching, the brief, dreadful blankness that came before recognition. She had seen it 100 times over the last 2 years. She had learned to wait it out, to hold her breath, to give him the seconds he needed to find her inside his own mind. 3 seconds. 4. 5. "Sarah!" She exhaled. A sound came out that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob, broken, relieved, desperate, the kind of sound she would have been embarrassed by later and never regret. She crossed the room in 4 steps, wrapped her arms around him, and pressed her face into his shoulder. "Don't you ever," she muttered into his hospital gown, "don't you ever do that again." Thomas's hand rose slowly, hesitant, unsure, and rested on the back of her head. He didn't speak. He couldn't. But his hand was there, and for the moment, that was enough. They stayed like that for a long time. When Sarah finally pulled back, wiped her eyes, and sat in the chair beside his bed, Thomas gave her a look she had never seen before. Not confusion, not blankness, something sharper. "The wolf," he said. Sarah blinked. "What?" "The wolf. Where is it?" She stared at him. This was not what she expected her father to say. "Where am I? What happened? Who are you?" "Dad, what wolf? You were found in the snow. Search and rescue brought you here. You had hypothermia. You nearly died." There was a wolf. Thomas's voice grew stronger, clearer. Each word carried a weight Sarah hadn't heard from him in over a year. A white wolf. It stayed with me. It kept me alive. "Dad." "I'm not confused, Sarah." He looked at her with the steady, unwavering gaze she remembered from childhood. The trooper's stare, the one that meant he was telling the truth, and he knew you knew it. "I know exactly what I saw. I know how I felt. The wolf saved my life." Sarah opened her mouth to answer, but before she could, there was a knock at the door. Dr. James Harlow stepped in, wearing a white coat, gentle eyes above a prematurely white beard. He held a clipboard, and an expression that was trying, desperately, to look professional and failing. "Thomas," he pulled up a chair, "you gave everyone quite a scare." "The wolf," Thomas said. Harlow stopped. He looked at Sarah. Sarah shook her head slightly, her expression saying, "I don't know either." "Thomas, the search and rescue crew filed their report this morning. Captain Chen, the team leader, confirmed it." He hesitated again, choosing his words carefully, because he knew what he was about to say would sound impossible. "A wolf was with you when they found you, a huge white wolf. It was lying next to you. It seems to have kept you warm all night." Sarah covered her mouth with her hand. "Captain Chen reported that the wolf wasn't acting aggressively," Harlow continued. "It moved aside when the rescue team arrived. It stayed in the clearing as the helicopter lifted off." He set the clipboard down and leaned forward. "Thomas, when they brought you in, your core body temperature was 89 degrees Fahrenheit. At minus 38 degrees Celsius, with the wind chill and the exposure time, your temperature should have been in the low 80s. You should have suffered significant organ damage. You should have gone into cardiac arrest." He paused. "You should be dead." Harlow lowered his voice. "The only explanation that makes medical sense is that something was giving you continuous body heat through the night. Something huge, warm enough to counteract the ambient temperature for about 8 hours. Thomas nodded slowly. "His name?" He paused. The fog was back, creeping in at the edges, warping faces, stealing words. He closed his eyes and searched for it, the name, the memory, the fragment, but it vanished like smoke between his fingers. "I don't remember his name," Thomas said quietly. "I can't remember what I called him, but I do remember his eyes. I remember his heartbeat." Harlow stared at him for a long time. Then he did something that surprised everyone in the room, including himself. "Then that's what matters," he murmured, placing his palm over Thomas's. The days that followed were a gradual, strange kind of purgation. Thomas's body healed. The frostbite in his fingers improved with therapy. His core temperature stabilized. His blood work improved. Physically, he was recovering faster than anyone had expected, something Harlow attributed to decades of conditioning and something else he couldn't put in a medical file. But Thomas was not at peace. He ate when he was told to. When the medication took hold, he slept. He answered the nurse's questions with the same polite, detached cooperation he had once used with detainees during interrogations. Present, but not engaged. Compliant, but not invested. His gaze kept returning to the window. Every morning when Sarah arrived at the hospital, she found her father sitting up in bed, turned toward the glass, watching snow fall over Fairbanks, with an expression that broke her in ways she hadn't known were possible. It wasn't sadness, it wasn't confusion, it was searching. He wore the same look she had seen in the cabin 3 weeks earlier, a man looking for something he knew was out there, but couldn't quite reach. "Dad," she said on the third morning, "talk to me." Thomas didn't turn from the window. "Something's missing." "I know, but you're safe now, you're—" "Not me." He finally looked at her. "Something out there is missing. Something that should be here." Sarah sat down carefully. She watched his face, the furrow in his brow, the tight set of his jaw, the way his fingers curled against the blanket as if gripping something invisible. "The wolf," she whispered. Thomas nodded, and Sarah understood, suddenly, that saving her father's body had been the easy part. The hard part, the part no hospital, no treatment, and no amount of love could fill, was the hole the wolf had left behind. On December 24th, Christmas Eve, Dr. Harlow signed the discharge papers. Thomas was stable, his vitals were normal, the frostbite was healing. There was no medical reason to keep him. Sarah drove him back to the cabin. The road was ploughed but icy, so she drove carefully, both hands on the wheel, glancing at her father every few minutes. Thomas sat silent in the passenger seat, his forehead against the window, watching snow-covered spruce trees slide past like a film he'd seen but couldn't remember. When they reached the cabin, Frank Dawson stood on the porch. He'd cleaned the place, restocked the firewood, fixed the door, and put fresh sheets on the bed. He shook Thomas's hand without a word, because Frank was the kind of man who knew some situations didn't need words. Sarah helped Thomas inside. She built a fire, heated the soup. Then she sat across from him at the kitchen table and watched him eat, trying not to think too far ahead. "I'm staying," she said quietly. "I already called the hospital in Anchorage. I'm asking for permission." Thomas nodded. "There's no need for that. This isn't up for discussion, Dad." He looked at her for a long time, and for a brief moment the fog lifted, and she could see him really seeing her, her true shape. The man who had raised her, taught her to drive in winter, sat in the front row of every school play, graduation and birthday, and held her mother's hand for 49 days, murmured, "You're just like your mother." Sarah smiled. Tears came, but she smiled through them. "That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me." That night, Sarah slept in the guest room. Thomas sat in his chair beside the hearth. He did not sleep. He listened to the wind. He watched the flames. And at some point, he couldn't say when, he stood and drifted to the window that looked out toward the eastern trail. The moon was full, heavy, silver, turning the snow into a bright white plain all the way to the tree line. Thomas pressed his fingers to the cool glass and stared into the dark. Nothing moved. But somewhere, far away, carried on the wind like a ghost, a wolf howled. Thomas closed his eyes. His palm trembled against the glass. "I'm here," he whispered. "I'm still here." Hope had arrived, but fate had other plans. Christmas morning came without sound. No wind, no storm, no howling, just silence. The deep, crystalline silence that only Alaska knows. When the temperature drops so far below zero, the air itself seems to freeze in place and the world stops breathing. Thomas was already awake. He hadn't slept. He'd spent the night in his chair by the fireplace, watching the flames die, the embers glow, and the first pale light of dawn creep across the floor like something alive. Sarah slept in the guest room, and he could hear her breathing through the thin walls, steady and slow, like someone who had finally allowed herself to rest after days of dread. He didn't wake her. He stood. He put on his patrol boots, still stained with snow and river muck from that night. He slipped into his old parka, the one with the trooper patch and the faint trace of wolf fur inside. He opened the front door and stepped out. The world was glass. The storm had scrubbed everything clean. Snow lay in flat, unbroken sheets that caught the early light until it was almost too bright to look at. The sky was pale blue, not the deep blue of midday, but the thin, fragile blue of early morning, as if the color itself were just waking. Spruce trees stood motionless, heavy with snow, their shadows deep and blue-violet on the white ground. And above it all, the aurora borealis, fading but still visible against the brightening sky. Green and violet ribbons rippled across the heavens like curtains stirred by an upper atmosphere breeze. Silent, enormous, ancient. Thomas stepped off the porch and began walking toward the trail. He didn't choose to walk. He didn't think about it. His boots found the route the way they always had, by memory, by instinct, by the deep certainty 30 years of repetition had carved into his body. Past the dead spruce, straight by the boulder, down the slope to the creek bed. He walked for 20 minutes. The cold brushed his face, and he felt nothing. Something was pulling him forward, the same force that had dragged him out of the cabin 8 nights earlier, the same force that had guided him through the blizzard, the same power that had kept one solitary memory alive in a mind losing everything. He reached the clearing, the same clearing where search and rescue had found him, the same place where he'd sat in the snow, his hand on the wolf's head, and cried for the first time in 4 years. Snow had erased every trace of that night. No footprints, no marks, no proof anything had happened at all. Thomas stopped in the center of the clearing. His breath left him in slow, white puffs. His heart beat steadily, not fast, not frightened, expectant. The heartbeat of a man who knows something is about to happen. He waited. 1 minute. 2. 3. The stillness was absolute. Not a branch cracked, not a bird called. There wasn't even the whisper of wind. It was the kind of silence that pressed against your eardrums until you could hear your own blood moving through your veins. And then, a sound. Soft, almost unreal. Snow compressing under weight. Thomas stopped breathing. A shape appeared at the tree line, in the dark gap between 2 tall spruces where the shadows still held and the morning light hadn't reached. White on white. Slow, deliberate, massive. The wolf stepped into the clearing the way the sun rises, gently, certainly, as if it had always been there, and the only question was when. Its coat caught the dawn and flared with a brightness that made the snow look dim. It moved fluidly, unhurried, each stride placed with the precision of an animal that knew every inch beneath its paws. It stopped 20 feet from Thomas. The amber eyes, burning, bright. They locked onto his with such intensity, the distance between them seemed to vanish, making 20 feet feel like an inch. Everything held still, the clearing, the sky, the light. The aurora still shimmered above them. It was as if the world had paused to watch what would happen next. Thomas stared at the wolf. The wolf stared at Thomas. 1 second, 2, 3, 4, 5. The wolf stepped forward. Thomas stepped forward. Another step, then another. The distance closed. 20 feet became 15. 15 became 10. 10 became 5. 5 became 3. 3 became 1. They stood face to face, close enough to touch, close enough to feel each other's breath. Thomas was on his feet, trembling, tears streaming, his chest so full of something enormous and unnamed it felt like his ribs might crack. The wolf stood tall, amber eyes level with his, warm smoke rising from its breath and mingling with Thomas's in the icy air. Even the wind seemed to pause. Then it happened. Something no disease could stop, no doctor could explain. The creature had spent 8 days outside a hospital room, 6 years in the wild, a lifetime moving through cold. And the memory broke through. Not a fragment, not a flash, not a ghost pressing against dark walls. The whole thing, complete, vivid, absolute, burst from the deepest part of Thomas Wilder's mind, like a dam giving way. The creek frozen, the hole in the ice, his arms in black water, the pup, tiny, white, shivering, pressed to his bare chest inside his coat, the heartbeat, the amber eyes lifting to meet his whisper into the cold, "You're safe now." And the name he'd given the pup that night, the name he'd said on the way back to his truck, the name he'd repeated while he wrapped it in blankets, drove it to the wildlife rescue station, and handed it over with hands that didn't want to let go. The name returned like a key turning in a lock. Siku. The word left his lips like something sacred. The wolf's ears snapped forward. Its entire body went still, so perfectly still it looked carved from ice. Its amber eyes widened. Thomas said it again. Siku. The low, trembling sound rose in his throat, stronger now, certain. He didn't care that tears ran down his cheeks and froze. He didn't care about anything except the name and the wolf, and the impossible, magnificent fact that they were both standing here, alive, in this clearing, on Christmas morning, 6 years after a frozen river should have ended one story, and 8 days after a blizzard nearly ended the other. Thomas dropped to his knees. He opened his arms. The wolf came to him, not cautiously, not carefully, not with the measured approach of a wild animal weighing its options. Siku crossed the last distance in 2 steps, driving his massive body into Thomas's chest with such force the old man nearly toppled backward into the snow. His huge head buried into the crook of Thomas's neck, his front paws lifted on either side of Thomas's shoulders, and that sound, that quivering, resonant, ancient sound, poured out of him like a song he'd been holding inside for 6 years. Thomas wrapped his arms around the wolf. He buried his face in thick white fur. He felt Siku's heartbeat against his own, strong, fast, alive, and the rhythm was the same, beat for beat, breath for breath. "I remember," Thomas murmured into the fur. The 2 hearts had met in darkness, lost each other, and found their way back. "I remember everything. I remember the river. I remember your heartbeat. I remember your eyes. I remember." He was shaking, not from cold, but from the weight of 6 years collapsing into one moment. From the staggering miracle of being known by a creature that owed him nothing, yet gave him everything. "You waited," Thomas whispered. His voice broke on the word. "You waited for me." Siku pressed closer. His tail swept the snow behind them. His breath was warm on Thomas's neck. His amber eyes stayed closed. He was home. They were both home. Sarah found them 40 minutes later. She woke to an empty cabin, a cold fireplace, and patrol boots missing from the entryway, and dread hit her like a physical blow. She threw on her coat and ran outside, following the boot prints in fresh snow, heart pounding, breath ragged, every worst-case thought playing on repeat. She followed the tracks into the clearing, pushed past the last line of spruce trees, and stopped, Her father was kneeling in the snow, arms wrapped around the biggest white wolf she'd ever seen. The wolf was pressed against his chest, head tucked under his chin, tail swaying slowly back and forth. They were still, except for that tail, moving like a metronome to a rhythm only they could hear. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Her knees buckled. She sank into the snow at the edge of the clearing and watched. She didn't approach. She didn't call out. She didn't move. Some moments don't belong to the people who witness them. Some moments belong only to the two beings inside them, and all you can do is watch. Thomas looked up. He saw Sarah across the clearing, and he smiled. Not the uncertain, half-present smile she'd grown used to, a real smile, full, clear. Thomas looked down at Siku, smiling the way you smile when you find something you thought you'd lost forever. His voice rang across the clearing like a bell. "It means ice." Sarah laughed. The sound came out broken, wet, and beautiful. She held both hands to her face, laughing and crying at the same time as she sat in the snow on Christmas morning and watched her father hold a wolf. Above them, the aurora borealis pulsed in green, violet, and silver, as if the sky itself were celebrating. Siku didn't leave. Not that morning, not that afternoon, not the next day, or the day after that. He stayed at the edge of the clearing, visible from the cabin window as a white shape against white snow, and he walked the trail with Thomas every morning, not as a pet, not as a possession, as a companion, a partner, living proof that some bonds aren't limited by species, time, or the failures of the human mind. Dr. Harlow called it extraordinary. Captain Chen called it impossible. Wildlife biologists who heard the story called it an anomaly, a 1 in a million deviation that ran against everything known about wolf-human interaction, because they had no other explanation. Thomas sat by the fireplace, that distant, almost scream-like wind sound echoing off the walls, and said, "He remembered me. That's all. He remembered me. And he came back." Sarah looked at her father. The fog hadn't vanished. It was there, and it would always be there, creeping at the edges, stealing the small things. But the center held. The river, the pup, the amber eyes, the name, unchanged, a lighthouse in the dark. "Merry Christmas, Dad," she whispered, as the fire crackled on. Thomas smiled. "Merry Christmas, sweetie." Outside, in the silver-blue darkness of Alaska's winter, a white wolf sat at the tree line, watching the light in the cabin window, amber eyes reflecting the glow, breath rising in slow, steady plumes. He didn't go. He wouldn't. Some goodbyes don't need words, and some bonds don't need memory. They live deeper than the mind can reach, in blood, in bone, in the ancient, unbreakable connection between two hearts that chose each other on the coldest night of the year and never let go. This story reminds us that loyalty isn't a human invention. It is older than language, older than civilization, older than memory itself. It lives in the pause between heartbeats, in the silence between words, in the instant one living creature looks at another and decides, without reason, without logic, without anything the intellect can explain, that you are mine and I am yours, and nothing can change that. Thomas Wilder lost his memory. He lost his wife. He could no longer work. He slowly lost almost every part of his life. But he never forgot what happened on a frozen river 6 years earlier, when a terrified wolf pup needed a hand. Because not everything is stored in the brain. Some things are stored in the heart, and the heart does not forget. Not ever. Not even when everything else does. If you were moved by this story, share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe animals remember who helped them? Have you ever felt a bond that went beyond words, logic, and explanation? Tell your story, because stories like this deserve to be told.